Everyone, I'm Karthik, co-founder CEO of DataWeave. I'm here to introduce the VC panel. We've seen in the last few weeks very interesting conversations on how there are 100 unicorns in India, and then the pendulum sway on the impending recession. So it's up for a very interesting discussion on what's in store from a VC perspective, and also how critical, given how critical the US-India corridor is for startups like ours, understanding and creating the playbook is going to be critical to create more such companies like the ones that we heard here. So introducing Vinod, my friend, he was the founder of CloudCherry, sold to Cisco. Now he's part of Uniphore. Then we have Somesh, Varsha, Tagare, Khare, Alex, and yep. So I'll let Vinod introduce the panel members, and over to you folks. Thank you.
All right, let's do this. Can you guys hear me? Oh, you can now. Okay. It's hard for me to sit, so I'm going to stand. I'm going to take John's cue and walk around the room to see who's fiddling with their phones. So here's a good reason to pay attention. I'm fairly confident that the combined assets under management with these four folks here matches the GDPs of countries. So I'd lean in and pay attention to what they have to say. It is my privilege to host this panel. My name is Vinod. I sold my startup to Cisco. I was at Cisco. My proudest work is the fact that I'm the co-chair for the USISPF Startup Connect program. So John gave us the opportunity to do that with Umesh. I'm also the founding volunteer at SaaS Boomi initiative that Umesh mentioned, which is where a lot of B2b SaaS founders come in. And we spoke about talking to each other, solving problems. We solved each other's problems so well that Umesh hired me to join Uniphore. So I now work at Uniphore. So there's a lot of cross connects between us. So instead of me announcing the panel, I'd probably give you all a minute each. Just talk about who you are, where you're coming from, and what's your area of focus and involvement in the US-India corridor. Varsha, yeah, you're first.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Varsha Tagare. I'm part of Qualcomm Ventures. We are excited about all things mobility. So we invest in areas of 5G, IoT, auto, AI, and security. And we have practice in 7 continents around the world. So if you are in that area, please look us up. We also have a strong India practice and a cross-border corridor. So super excited to be here.
Alex.
Great to be here. My name is Alex, managing partner with Salesforce Ventures. We're the venture capital arm of Salesforce. We've been investing for about 12 years now, $5 billion under management. Pretty straightforward. We do SaaS, kind of B2B is our focus for obvious reasons. We've been investing globally. So last year, half of our deals were outside the US. We've now invested in close to 25 countries. And I relocated from London to San Francisco kind of six months ago, but a couple years ago, we started investing in India, and so super excited to be here. We've got a number of companies there that we've backed, and very excited about the ecosystem in this conversation.
Hey everyone, I'm Somesh. I work with IVP. We focus on growth technology companies across the world, and have been doing it for quite some time. I've been personally an investor in a number of companies in India over the last 21 years, and funds. And institutionally, a number of our companies, whether it's Rubrik or Coinbase or Twitter, have all focused on India as an end market, as well as building offices there. I also recently joined the board of USISPF, so I get the privilege of working with Mukesh, John, Gaurav, and many others in this room. So very excited to talk through a bunch of topics and hopefully make this exciting and interactive too.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Khare with Lightspeed, India. We've been investing in India since 2015 or so. 2007 or so, for 15 years. And for about $1.5 billion to work in India, mostly seed and Series A type investments. I was there for the last 10 years, had moved there from here in 2011, and actually just moved back to the Bay Area last year, because about a quarter of our companies are India-US corridor companies in multiple areas. We'll talk about that later. And really excited about seeing this wave of entrepreneurs come here from India, as well as companies from here go to India, both ways.
Awesome, thank you. So John, we're talking about the number of unicorns. I saw a report yesterday or day before. There's 100 unicorns in India now, so we've hit a century, so that number is obviously growing fast.
The Indian government's getting very good at marketing.
That is true. The moment the 100th announced the fundraise, it's all out. So marketing's half the job done, right? So, so I want to start with a very seemingly macro question, but it'll give you some insight, because if I went and polled the room on what's happening in India, we'd probably get 100 different perspectives. And I think these 4 are very important. So maybe I'll start with you, Somesh. And what's happening in India? Why are we all in the room? What's so exciting?
Well, I think zooming out for a bit, there's never been a more exciting time to be following, investing, and working in the Indian startup ecosystem. I remember going to NASSCOM events in 2001, 2002 when I lived in Mumbai, and it was all a dream at that point, a vision about what it could be. That vision has become reality through the leadership of the central government, also state governments that have done an amazing job of coalescing resources. I think you see opportunities. Now, you mentioned the 100 unicorns, Vinod. I think you see in fintech a sector that's now getting to the point where there's going to be large independent companies that become alternatives to the traditional payment rails and payment systems. In infrastructure software and application software, of course, you see that. I think healthcare after this pandemic is going to be a huge place, both for services as well as therapeutics and a lot of other ecosystem investments that could occur. Because when the USISPF hosted Finance Minister Sitaram recently, she talked about just how integrated the central to local application of healthcare is. My one thing I would say that's interesting about India is that the unicorn thing is a wonderful market thing. I agree with John. What's just as important, not more long term, is independent decacorns that are producing free cash flow and returning capital to the people that put money into them. So I think as we sit here in the United States, we're seeing the reckoning of a lot of unicorns that are no longer sustainable in the public markets. I think the lessons we can take from that is instituting discipline, great management, metrics, and OKRs along the way, so that when they become public, they are not public and then sort of flailing around for years and years, but they become 20, 30-year runs. I'll share with everyone one fun statistic that I told our LPs this morning. In this country, in Black Monday, if people remember, October 19, 1987, Microsoft had been public for 18 months, and it stopped trading after 2 hours. And analysts predicted that it would be over, and the company would be delisted, and it stayed flat for 2 years. Today, Microsoft is, of course, a true $1 trillion market cap, number 2 in the S&P 500. So we have to keep dreaming in decades and not get worried if like a few companies don't do well, if a few companies are trading under. I personally think we're going to see more decacorns out of India than any other country besides the United States in the next few years.
So dream in decades, I love that. I'm just making a note. What about others? What is your perspective? Alex, Varsha, Dave?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think I agree with what's been shared. The big change for us that we're super excited about is this kind of evolution of B2B SaaS becoming really exciting in the ecosystem. The trend we've seen in many countries is oftentimes, the ecosystem starts with consumer, marketplaces, e-commerce, and that's a great place to start. But I think now we're actually seeing, whether it's fintech, infrastructure, security, application layer software, that's the next generation of kind of unicorns and decacorns. And that's a big change. I think India's always had an amazing kind of talent ecosystem with lots of engineers kind of coming out of universities every year. But the fact that they're going to go start these more technical businesses with amazing innovation and actually sell that globally. The types of entrepreneurs that we like to back are not looking to build the best, data collaboration company in India. They're trying to build the best data collaboration company anywhere in the world. And I think for the first time, we really feel like the ingredients are there for these companies to build these successful companies. And a great data point, I think Freshworks coming out with the US listing, with less than half the revenue being in the US, I think it's kind of 30-40% of the revenues in North America. That's a great testament to investor appetite. Typically you see the ratio reversed, where 70-80% of the company's revenues in the US and maybe 20 or 30% is abroad. And so to see that kind of path, I think is a huge validation. And we've made a number of investments in companies that are maybe 2-3 years behind, and some are just getting started at the seed stage. But that kind of innovation in B2B SaaS is something that we think is new and super exciting.
Varsha, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in addition to B2B SaaS, we are excited about deep technology being at Qualcomm. And I think we are seeing companies that are getting built for India. Southeast Asia and the world. So it's not just the US-India corridor, but it's also the Southeast Asia, European corridor. And we're seeing liquidity in the Indian market. So one of our companies called MapMyIndia went public in December. It's still holding its value since then, but the good thing is they found liquidity in the market in India, being really tailored for Southeast Asia, Japan market. So not just MapMyIndia, we have other companies from my co-investors here probably called Grey Orange, which is doing robotics. So you're seeing many other varieties outside of SaaS, which is what we are excited about at Qualcomm.
Dave, from your vantage point, what's happening in India?
Yeah, maybe just to add to the discussion, I think a lot of the discussion here has been companies from India and founders from India coming here. Just two other varieties to talk about. We do seed and Series A, so we need to think about what could happen 5 years from now. I think one is India to India type startups, like Varsha was saying, B2b India to India. We're starting to see corporates in India paying $500,000, $1 million a year for software, which has previously not been seen, and also in Southeast Asia and the GCC countries more broadly. That's the second wave. India to other regional sort of countries. That also has typically not been seen, and typically there's sort of a question of TAM, but we see that growing pretty dramatically, and also that market being far less competitive than India to US. So I think that's an interesting two new vectors that are emerging, B2B and B2C.
Awesome. I think everyone knows here, the first wave we essentially exported intellect. The best people just finished for higher education, came to the US, to the UK, just left. The second wave, obviously, IT came to India, and then we were told what to build, and we built it beautifully, right? We exported property. But now the intellect and the property have come back together, and we're finally creating IP for the world. And I think that is incredibly proud. And I think the second thing I want to highlight is, for the longest time, it was assumed that the big delta was the cost base. So you could build SMB-focused SaaS companies out of India, and there was a cost delta. But we all know that in enterprise sales of any size, cost is one vector. It can never be a pervasive advantage. And now you're seeing enterprise-focused companies like Uniphore, and there were at least two on the panel before us. And I know both of you have jointly backed some B2B SaaS companies which do exactly that. So I think this is the coming of age of India SaaS. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because Dave, you wrote a piece and you said there are 5 areas of innovation you're seeing in India. Let's go into that, because everyone alluded to some areas and vectors. But I'd just love for everyone to know, like Taiwan's known for semiconductors. What should we be looking at India entrepreneurs to creating?
Yeah, it's kind of like India as a tourist destination. There's no one thing to point to, like Nepal has Mount Everest, and India's got lots of different things, so it's kind of like that flavor. But what I wrote was that I just looked at the unicorns, and John mentioned there's many different sources of number of unicorns. There's one source I saw that said there were 80 end of last year. And I just sort of eyeballed sort of which ones are looking to go international for their impact opportunity, not just for incremental 25% sales. And about 1/3 of the large internet startups in India have international as their main impact opportunity, which was a higher number. And then as I polled in other investors and looked at their portfolios, the number is somewhere between 25% and 1/3 for most investors in India. So that's one sort of thing to look at. Now within that 25-33%, I see 5 areas which are India to global. The early adopter of that trend was SaaS, which we've talked about a bunch over here. Right behind that is B2b Marketplaces. These are companies where the supply might be organized out of India or Asia more broadly, but serving the world. Examples are companies that provide manufacturing services, companies that provide labor marketplace or labor-oriented services, and so on. We can get into some of those examples if you want. Right behind that is financial technology companies, like Somesh was saying, fintech B2B companies that are enabling B2B flows between countries. And that's happening. Crypto is the next one. And the final one is EdTech, more of a B2C service, but India as a teacher hub, and also a very big demand hub. So companies can actually get to scale over there and export. In our portfolio, we've got Byju's, Banzu, a bunch of other companies that have done that. And so I think these are 5 vectors that at least seem to be emerging for in addition to SaaS.
Awesome. Somesh, we can go down and just see any sectors you want to bring it home that you're focusing on.
I think for us, what we see is definitely in data analytics infrastructure. I mean, if you think about the next generation of the cloud stack, a lot of those companies will originate, I think, in India. And I think when we say India versus the US, I think these are artificial barriers. I actually think that I don't even know where half our CEOs live anymore. Some of them are just nomadic, and they keep going where tax rates go down. So, but I think for many people, these are distributed workforces. I think they find opportunities. So I think that distinction is less important today. I think for us, as Dev said, we've looked a lot in B2B SaaS. And the point he made on global marketplaces are key screening criteria. We always look at it and say, there's of course a big market within India, and you could build very large standalone companies there. But to get to the 10 to 100 billion is the aspiration of the founders to actually be global in scale and continue to invent new products and go into new TAMs that give you that expansion opportunity, which is how a Microsoft or Apple gets to 2 or 3 trillion over 3 to 4 decades. So that's kind of what I think we see as opportunity. One thing Dev said on the labor market, I'll just note as a fun anecdote. Yesterday was Mother's Day. Happy belated Mother's Day to all the moms out there. We had 3 generations of my family got together about 20 minutes from here. And my 9-year-old daughter said, Dad, I'd like to start a company someday, but do I have to do that here, or can I go do it in India, right? It just shows you that this concept that we've all had, that you come here and you do that, is changing for the next generation. Even those born here now have much more courage about doing that in India.
Love that. That's awesome. Alex?
Yeah, look, I think, by the way, I couldn't agree more on the great companies can start anywhere. And actually, I think COVID's really given companies in places that typically were not in the limelight an advantage, because it's leveled the playing field. I mean, I mentioned we did a number of investments in the last couple of years. A bunch of those founders we didn't even meet in person. They were based in India, travel was restricted, we couldn't get there. And so all of a sudden, you're a Zoom click away, which I do think just changes the dynamic in terms of, obviously Sand Hill Road is iconic. Long gone, I think, are the days where entrepreneurs need to come here to fundraise. And so I think there's a huge shift where we're going to where the entrepreneurs are, and India is certainly a place where that's happening. The one kind of slightly different perspective we have is, I think right now I'd say there's only a handful of industry verticals that are big enough in India to support $10 billion companies focused on India alone. Financial services is probably one, maybe healthcare. But as you go down that list, I think it's, having that global perspective we think is super important. And what we're seeing, with companies like Darwinbox and Yellow and Hashnode and others is they're able to do that globally. They don't have to be constrained. And so one of the best kind of compliments we think one of our companies can get is when a customer doesn't even know that this company is based in India. And it's actually the customer success function, the product team, the caliber of what they're seeing is just so world-class that fundamentally it doesn't matter where they're based. They're just solving a real pain point. And that's what gets the customer happy, and that's what gets us excited as investors. So, I think it's amazing that rising tide will lift all boats in terms of the local economy, but what really gets us excited is the global opportunity these companies are going to go tackle from India.
Awesome. Varsha, let's close it out with you.
I would just give a simple example of things that are Asian. We love the 4-wheelers, but the 2-wheelers are all in Asia. So I think the innovation in that sector of auto may not come from here. So I think as we look at other sectors outside, measurable, very large sectors outside of SaaS, there will be others that will be really predominant in the Asian ecosystem. So let's broaden our lens and look at other sectors outside of what we typically.
So message heard, it's not just software. Okay, that's good to know. All right, so we've long felt that when you look at this is US-India strategic partnership forums, right? We're not just talking about something very linear, and no international friendship, alliance, anything works unless it's a win-win for both parties. And we actually did some jobs data. So John said it best when he said the US-India strategic partnership is the most defining relationship of the 21st century, powered by startups, because these are the vehicles that are going to create jobs and IP and prosperity and a new economic model. And I'll give you one data point which we collected from our startups last year, which is incredible. So we just polled our startups and asked them, how many non-immigrant visas did you apply for? How many local jobs did you create? And how many jobs did you create in India? Now, one great thing was these companies are headquartered here, so the IP is here, the IPOs or M&A is going to happen here. But for each non-immigrant visa granted to one of the USISPF Startup Connect founders, 40 local American jobs were created at 3.5x the US national average. This is last year's data. That number was projected to grow 2x, and at least from Uniphore, I know that they've hit that number, right? So that number is probably double. And for each job in the US, 8 jobs were created in India. So this is a relationship where IP is being generated here, prosperity is being created in both areas. So it's a true win-win, which means you can take this model with pride, knowing that both countries benefit from it. Which is why I come to a very important question, which is, please give me your perspective on how the US-India ecosystem is intertwined. How enmeshed are these startups in US economy, culture, whatever metric you want to use to do it. So maybe I'll start with, who do we go? Alex, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, sure, happy to. By the way, super interesting data, and that's great to hear. I think, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. I mean, I think if I look at our portfolio, you've got some companies that have really, one of the founders has kind of come here and moved, and that's the playbook of starting and actually expanding into the US. I think you have other companies where they kind of start that process, from India, wait a little bit, get kind of customers, pull them in, and then start to kind of penetrate the ecosystem. But overall, I think what we're seeing is there's actually a well-trodden path there, and ultimately, the timing of when you do that, I think, can vary depending on what you're doing. In the example of Yellow.ai, which were investors, they're actually penetrating this kind of US ecosystem very early in their development. Still a young business, but really focused on conversational intelligence and contact centers. And so huge market here for that. And so they were one of the early ones to come in. I know we share Darwinbox in common as well. They're kind of slightly farther ahead and probably delayed that more than a company like Yellow. But what they're finding is huge kind of open arms from the customer base. And I think that's where you see that kind of connectivity, where a lot of talent has, first of all, gone back and forth. We see that with folks that have kind of returned back to India and then have kind of connections and ecosystem advantages. You have a lot of universities that obviously send talent back and forth. And you have a lot of investors that have those roots. This panel is a great example of, in different flavors, what that looks like. So I think the path is there. Probably the biggest challenge I see in terms of that link is marketing. John talked about the unicorn piece on marketing, and this is not just for India. A lot of companies we see outside the U.S., they're not as good as marketing as companies in the U.S. And so I think the one thing that we hope to see more of is companies that have these amazing technologies and innovations and products. How do you penetrate that game of becoming the most brand-aware company in your space? Because oftentimes it's not just the value of the technology, it's also how you market it. And I think that's the area that's probably the least penetrated in terms of that link. And we're excited to try to do our part to help that.
So I know you had some strong thoughts on the subject, so maybe
Yeah.
you want to go next.
I'm happy to jump in. I'd say tightly integrated, historically been the case. There's been migration that's occurred for graduate school and then the earliest generations of Silicon Valley companies from Intel onwards of great engineering talent that move into founders, venture capital. So I think that part is all there. I think the challenges are that not all stages are treated equally. So in the angel sector that Dev, you spent a lot of time in, unfortunately, we still see a lot of examples where people are trying to rush to liquidity, quick exits, early wins, versus the patient approach that leads to ecosystems being created. So, it is an Andy Bechtolsheim that can go write a check in Google and then have the confidence and patience to leave that alone for a while. If the thought then is, let me actually, sell the business and get my 2x after my, 20 post, that is problematic. I'm hopeful that more and more of the successful Indian entrepreneurs that are either in India or here will invest more of their personal capital into creating those PayPal-like ecosystems that can spawn lots of companies and have patience and higher loss versions so that they don't worry as much about losing their personal capital. On the other end of the spectrum, because we look at the barbell a lot, I think the other piece of this is public US companies that are on NASDAQ, offering mentorship and perspective on the going public process. We saw in Freshworks, I think, a great example of an early win that's great for the ecosystem. But we're going to need for the ecosystem to be solvent, I think, and really hit its potential, 10 to 20, $10 billion plus companies, and hopefully a few that surpass $100 billion in market cap in the next 10 to 15 years. And for that, I think governance, diversity on boards, I know you have some thoughts on this too as well, Vinod, are all things that are worth doing now so that when you get to that point, you've actually thought about it beforehand.
Awesome. So since we spoke about the Freshworks IPO twice, if you've seen that big picture of the Freshworks IPO, which you're all proud of, everyone's in a black suit. Please zoom in. There's somebody in khakis and a brown shirt. That is me. I'm just kidding. I didn't get the memo, obviously. Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all the comments. Maybe just two areas, maybe for USISPF to think about. There's a whole new class of investors emerging in India, which are family offices. So these are all the big corporates in India that have now gotten excited about innovation and startups and want to invest. Right now, they're not allowed to invest in US companies. There's a limit on how much capital they can send abroad to invest in USC corporations, so that advocacy would help. Certainly it's interesting for companies to be able to sell into corporates in India and to partner with them on go-to-market and so on. I think that's one. And then the second one that everybody's been talking about is letting Indian companies, India private limited companies, list anywhere in the world. That was on the Prime Minister's table pre-COVID. Because of COVID, we've heard it was put to the side, which I understand. But that would be really interesting, a really interesting way to get more capital into India. I think those are two areas that we should think about advocating the Indian government.
Awesome. Closing thoughts from Varsha, and then we go to the last question. Varsha.
I think having additional corporates participate in addition to family offices, we do see that upswing. Qualcomm has been there for a long time as a patient investor, but it'll be great to see additional corporates participating in the corridor and some ability for ease of structuring. I mean, Anil is here and he helps a lot of our companies, but some way of easing of structures so that it does become seamless for the entrepreneurs and the stakeholders would be great to see.
We know about that.
He represents a law firm, so just for you to know. I'm just kidding. Okay, we are out of time because Representative Khanna is waiting for us. So from there, this is your last speed question, which is you can pick one of the two questions, which is crystal ball what this ecosystem will look like in 5 years' time, because this is so dynamic, or one constraint that you would love to make disappear to make that crystal ball vision happen. So we'll start from there maybe.
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, I moved here a year ago. I think there's about 50 companies where founders have moved from India. 5 years from now, I expect that to be 1,000 companies and at least 20 of them public.
Nice. That's brilliant.
I go for the constraint. I think being involved in a number of companies here that are focused on mental health, the lesson from hypergrowth for 13 years here in the bull market is that there will be burnout. There will be a lot of issues that occur with these expectations. So if people can think ahead around how to support founders, create ecosystems, make therapy less taboo, and actually have venture capitalists be part of that dialogue versus sort of after the fact they say, oh, I wish they had done this, that'll really help the ecosystem.
Awesome. Alex.
Great. Yeah, I'd say kind of 5 years out, the thing that we'd love to see, kind of big picture thinking, is not only large-scale IPOs, but large-scale M&A. You know, I think you need kind of both sides of the equation to be healthy and thriving, and to see, you know, US-based companies acquiring in India will be really exciting.
5 years from now, we don't talk about constraints anymore. How about that? And USISPF plays a key role in removing all of them.
I'll leave you with a light thought. You know, when Umesh moved here, his valuation was $34 million 3 years ago. He had two things going for him. One, John's vision and belief in the company. The company's worth $2.5 billion now. And second, my wife drove him to DMV to get his license. So he had two really strong allies in his journey coming to the United States. The reason I'm telling you this story is when founders move here, they need a lot of help from figuring out where to live. Those logistical things take away 3 months of your life. I discovered it when I moved. Halfway through fixing my IKEA furniture, I realized that I'm not here on investor money to fix IKEA furniture. I'm supposed to use my time elsewhere. So please be involved in the community. The USISPF Startup Connect program was created exactly for that reason. The hope is that in 5 years' time, we have 350 startup members, all of whom who represent the collective will of these two countries. So please be involved in the ecosystem. Reach out to us. We'd love to make you part of the movement. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks, John, and thanks all of you for coming on.